Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into a medieval village square, and unfortunately for you, the very first thing that happens is that someone decides your neck and wrists fit perfectly into a set of wooden stocks. Not the best welcome gift, right? You've barely arrived and already you're stuck like a mannequin in the middle of town. You might laugh now, but honestly, you probably wouldn't survive your first day here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, tell me in the comments what city you're in right now, and what time it is where you are. I always love knowing where and when people are listening from. It feels like we're sharing the same slow night together across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Section 1. The wooden stocks creak as they close around you, and suddenly you realize you can't move your hands, can't scratch your nose, and you definitely can't just walk away. Medieval stocks were basically the sitting version of handcuffs, but with more splinters and way more staring eyes. Villagers would stroll by, some out of boredom, some just because you had become the evening's entertainment. You're not really in danger, at least not in the gruesome sense, but you are the medieval version of a social media meme, except you can't click log out. Historians say the stocks weren't meant to break your body so much as your pride. It was about making you visible. In an age without Twitter, this was the medieval retweet. Everyone sees you, everyone knows you did something wrong, and everyone gets to form an opinion. A common punishment in these stocks was for small offenses. Maybe you were caught cheating at the market scales, or you spoke out of turn about the local lord, or perhaps you simply looked suspicious in a place where suspicion itself was almost a crime. The irony is that historians are still debating whether the pain came more from the actual wooden contraption or from the boredom of sitting there for hours while your legs cramped. Imagine sitting cross-legged on a bus stop bench for a whole day, but unable to move even a finger. That's the feeling. Of course, there was a little comic element too. Villagers might toss rotten vegetables at you. It sounds humiliating, and yes, it was, but think about it, someone had to bring those vegetables from home. Meaning, someone thought, yes, this carrot is too moldy for dinner, but perfect for Steve in the stocks. You were basically recycling food waste by absorbing it with your face. Medieval sustainability. A fun little trivia fact, some towns would put stocks near the tavern. That way, if the punishment happened on a Saturday night, drunk patrons would come out and find you sitting there. You might get a song sung at you, a mug of ale poured on you, or maybe just a whole lot of drunken advice shouted into your ears. What's really fascinating is that some historians argue that people actually preferred the stocks to paying fines. Why? Because fines required money, and you couldn't always afford them. But a few hours of public shame? At least that didn't drain your wallet. And, let's be honest, once the day ended, you were free again, while the villagers moved on to gossip about someone else. The stocks were the medieval equivalent of trending topics, except you didn't have control over the hashtag. Now, here's the strange part. In some records, children were also placed in miniature stocks for small misbehaviors, like stealing apples or talking back. Imagine being 6 years old and finding yourself in a tiny wooden clamp. Historians are still debating if those child stocks were really widespread or more of a symbolic threat. But even the idea of it feels bizarre, doesn't it? Like handing out toy handcuffs, except it wasn't pretend. As the hours pass, you start to feel the ache in your shoulders. You realize the punishment wasn't about drama, it was about time. The slow ticking of boredom, the itchy frustration of stillness, the awkwardness of people's stares. You're not bleeding, you're not being whipped, but you're also not free. The real punishment is the monotony itself. So here you are, a temporary museum piece in your own life, realizing that medieval punishments weren't always about pain, they were about making you part of the scenery, like a bench that could blush. Section 2. The stocks are finally opened, and you think you're free, only to be marched a few steps away and introduced to another classic, the pillory. It looks similar at first glance, just another set of wood with holes, but here's the catch, this one forces you to stand. Your neck and wrists slide into the slots, and suddenly you're upright, stiff as a scarecrow, with no way to hide. Congratulations, you're now part of the local parade route, except you're not moving, everyone else is. Unlike the stocks, the pillory had a special gift, the crowd's creativity. People didn't just walk by, they performed. They jeered, sang little rhymes about your offense, or in some cases, got quite inventive with what they threw. Old eggs, spoiled bread, mud, or even, according to some records, smelly fish guts. And yet, historians still argue whether this was truly common or just exaggerated by later writers who loved drama. Standing there, you feel your legs tremble after an hour, your shoulders stiffen. The pillory wasn't about a quick humiliation, it was endurance theater. It could last a day, sometimes two. Imagine standing in one place so long that you memorize the cobblestones under your shoes. You become a landmark, a living street lamp, except far less useful. Now, here's a curious twist. In London, the pillory sometimes doubled as a political stage. If the crowd liked you, maybe they thought your crime wasn't really a crime, they'd actually protect you. Instead of rotten vegetables, you might receive applause, cheers, even flowers. There are recorded cases where crowds formed protective barriers, turning the punishment into a bizarre celebration. Think of it as medieval jury duty carried out by tomatoes. A fun, strange detail, some towns built their pillories on wheels so they could be rolled around. You, locked inside, were paraded through the streets, a moving billboard of bad decisions. It sounds absurd, but it allowed everyone in the town to enjoy the punishment equally. Nobody missed out. Imagine being the world's worst parade float, except you can't throw candy, only guilty expressions. But it wasn't all playful. If the crowd turned hostile, the pillory could be brutal. Objects thrown at you could injure, and standing exposed in weather, rain, sun, or snow was exhausting. Still, compared to harsher medieval justice, this was considered light. It was, in many ways, the board game version of punishment. The rules were simple, the setup was public, and everyone got to join in. You start to notice that this punishment wasn't just about you. It was about the community. People bonded over your discomfort. Neighbors laughed together, strangers exchanged jokes, children learned lessons, don't do what that person did. The pillory was the village's shared theater, half comedy, half warning. And even now, scholars debate what hurt more, the physical ache of standing for hours or the strange intimacy of being the town's entertainment. Maybe both. You, the unwilling actor, standing frozen as time dripped by. Section 3. You barely get out of the pillory, stretching your sore neck, when a group of villagers lead you toward a contraption that looks suspiciously like a rustic chair mounted on a long wooden beam. At first glance, it could be mistaken for a carnival ride. But no, you're about to meet the infamous ducking stool. You're seated, strapped in, and the chair tips forward over a river or pond. Splash! Down you go, like a sack of laundry. Then, just when you're completely soaked, the chair is pulled back up again. The crowd laughs, and before you can shake the water out of your ears, down you go, again. It's a rinse and repeat punishment, literally. The ducking stool was most commonly used against women accused of being scolds, basically, if you were too outspoken, too argumentative, or just annoyed the wrong neighbor. Historians are still debating whether this was really about silencing gossip or whether it was more of a theatrical warning to everyone else. Either way, you realize quickly that your voice, once loud, is now drowned out by the splash. There's a strange mix of comedy and cruelty here. From the outside, it looks almost playful, like a medieval water ride. From the inside, though, it's freezing, humiliating, and exhausting. You can't control when you're dipped, you can't predict how long they'll leave you under, and you definitely can't dry off in the sun with dignity. An odd historical note, in some towns, the ducking stool was built on wheels so it could be rolled from place to place. That way, if you were on tour as a punished gossip, you didn't just splash in one pond, you might get dunked in several. Imagine being the headline act in a traveling water show nobody wanted tickets for. Scholars also point out that men occasionally faced the ducking stool, though far less often. Usually it was women, which tells you plenty about gender expectations in medieval life. The stool wasn't just a punishment, it was a performance about roles, a way of saying, this is what happens if you step out of line. As the water drips from your hair and the laughter fades, you realize that the ducking stool wasn't designed to injure. It was designed to embarrass, to chill you into silence, and maybe to entertain the neighbors along the way. And if nothing else, it leaves you with one universal truth: medieval justice had a strange sense of humor, and you, strapped into a soggy wooden chair, are right in the middle of the joke. Section 4. You're still dripping from the ducking stool when, to your dismay, the villagers steer you toward yet another odd-looking invention. At first, you think it's a giant bird cage. In fact, it kind of is, but instead of keeping birds inside, it's designed for you. This is the whirligig, sometimes called the turning cage. You're pushed inside, the door slams shut, and then someone gives it a spin. The whole cage begins to rotate, slowly at first, then faster, and you're clinging to the bars like a reluctant carnival rider. Except there are no tickets, no funnel cakes, and definitely no fun. The punishment here is dizziness itself. The whirligig was used in parts of medieval Europe as a way to discipline people without leaving permanent marks. You might be accused of gossiping, stealing small goods, or just misbehaving in some petty way. Instead of whips or chains, you get a few rounds of being spun until you stagger. And historians are still debating whether this was common or just a rare curiosity that spread in rumor more than in practice. From the outside, it looked hilarious. Picture the townsfolk chuckling as you spin in slow, uneven circles, your hair flopping in all directions, your face pale. To them, it's slapstick comedy. To you, it's nausea, vertigo, and the desperate hope that nobody had cabbaged you for lunch. One strange recorded detail: in some towns, the whirligig was cranked by children. Imagine the glee of a pack of kids turning the handle, shouting with laughter as you spin like an unwilling top. It wasn't just punishment, it was entertainment for the younger generation. The lesson was clear: don't be like this person, or your future recess activity might involve spinning them too. And yet, despite the silliness, the whirligig carried a message. It made you lose control, robbed you of balance, and reminded you that your reputation could be turned upside down just as quickly as your body. What's more, scholars argue whether this was considered more merciful than the stocks. After all, once the spinning stopped, you were usually free to go. No splinters, no long hours of boredom. Just a brief, queasy performance. Still, you walk away staggering like a medieval sailor, and the laughter of the crowd lingers in your ears. So, there you are, dizzy, humiliated, but strangely relieved. Compared to other punishments, the whirligig feels almost playful if you ignore the fact that you now can't walk in a straight line. Section 5. You're still wobbling from the whirligig when someone grabs your arm, steadying you for only a second, before guiding you toward a long wooden beam. At first glance, you think it might be part of a barn door. But then you notice the iron rings dangling from it, and you realize this is the pillory, the medieval crowd's favorite stage for public theater. They tilt the wooden frame open, push your head and hands through the holes, and lock it shut. Suddenly, you're a very unwilling street decoration. People pass by, and each one feels entitled to throw something. A rotten turnip, a bucket of cold water, maybe even just a handful of mud scooped from the road. The punishment wasn't about pain, it was about spectacle. You didn't just break the rules, you became the entertainment. The pillory was common across Europe, and it could last hours or even days. Unlike the whirligig, which ended quickly, this one trapped you in stillness. You couldn't wipe your face, couldn't scratch an itch, couldn't even shoo away the flies that inevitably discovered you. Historians still debate whether the main goal was humiliation or deterrence, but the effect was the same: you felt utterly helpless while everyone else enjoyed the show. One odd fact, in some towns, bakers caught selling underweight bread were placed in the pillory with the loaves hung around their necks. Imagine standing there, neck sore, while people point and laugh, calling you the crumb thief. Your reputation crumbles faster than the bread you cheated them on. Another curious detail: people sometimes carved graffiti into the pillory itself, tiny initials, jokes, or little drawings scratched by bored teenagers. So while you're locked in, you might notice a centuries-old doodle of a fish or a badly carved heart. Even here, human boredom left its mark. Of course, not all pillory sessions were equal. Sometimes the crowd grew too rowdy, hurling stones instead of vegetables. Other times, passers-by ignored you, and you stood in silence with only your thoughts. Some scholars argue that this silence might have been the cruelest version, left alone in plain sight, invisible to everyone who no longer cared. You shift uncomfortably, feeling the wood press against your skin, the air thick with the smell of hay, horses, and baked pies from a nearby stall. You wish you could at least grab a snack, but your hands are trapped, dangling uselessly. Time moves slowly here, painfully, tediously slowly. And so you wait, stiff, embarrassed, and oddly contemplative. The pillory doesn't hurt your body much, but it chips away at your pride. For the crowd, it's a diversion. For you, it's a long reminder that in the medieval world, reputation was everything. and once lost, it was almost impossible to win back. Section 6. You're finally released from the pillory, rubbing your sore neck when a town official waves you over. You think, maybe this is it, maybe they'll let you go home. Instead, you pointed toward a curious contraption that looks like something halfway between a carnival ride and a very bad chair. It's the cucking stool. At first glance, you might mistake it for a sturdy wooden seat by the riverside, perfect for fishing. But no, this seat is strapped to a long beam, like a seesaw gone wrong. They motion for you to sit. Once you're tied in place, a group of laughing villagers push the beam downward, and, splash, you plunge straight into the cold, muddy water. Then up again. Then down again. Rinse, repeat, humiliation included. The cucking stool was often used for people accused of scolding too much, spreading gossip, or being just generally disruptive. You don't need to imagine very hard. The punishment felt like a medieval water ride designed by someone who hated fun. The idea wasn't to drown you, though sometimes it came close. It was to soak you, chill you, and let everyone enjoy the sight. Historians still argue over the subtle differences between the ducking stool and the cucking stool. Some sources use the terms interchangeably. Others say one was fixed by the river and the other on wheels so it could be paraded through town. Either way, you're the unlucky passenger. There's a certain comedy to it, at least for the spectators. You bob in and out of the water like a puppet, hair plastered to your face, clothes heavy and dripping. Villagers point and laugh as if they're watching slapstick theater. It's like an impromptu festival, except you are the unwilling entertainment. One quirky note, some towns made the cucking stool quite elaborate, carving decorations on the chair itself. Imagine sitting on a throne, except the throne is designed to dunk you in filthy water. Even stranger, there are records of husbands being punished this way too, though gossiping wives were the more common target. The symbolism was clear, your voice was loud, so now water would quiet it. And here's where the absurdity deepens. Scholars point out that these punishments were often scheduled for market days, guaranteeing the biggest possible audience. So you're not just cold and wet, you're performing in front of nearly everyone you know. The punishment wasn't private, it was practically an advertisement for what happens if you talk too much. You cough, spit out some river water, and look up at the crowd. A kid waves. Someone else cheers as you plunge again. You can't help but think, this feels less like justice and more like a twisted game show challenge. You're not sure which is worse, the water in your nose or the laughter in your ears. And so you sit there, dripping, shivering, half wishing you could just stay underwater and nap. But no, the crowd pulls the beam back up again, because the show must go on. Section 7. You're shivering from the cucking stool and think, surely this is the last of it. But no, someone gestures toward a narrow, metallic instrument lying on a small table. It looks like a flute, but too big, too heavy, and definitely not meant for music you'd recognize. You've just met the shame flute. The official straps you in and places the long tube in your hands. You're instructed to play it, which mostly involves blowing awkwardly while trying not to topple over. Every note is off-key, every puff of air a minor disaster. The crowd gathers, snickering, pointing at your attempts. The punishment is equal parts performance and embarrassment. The shame flute was used to punish artisans or minor townspeople who had committed petty offenses, like laziness or small thefts. Historians are still debating how widespread this practice was. Some suggest it was a localized curiosity, while others claim it was more common in regions of Germany and the Low Countries. Either way, you quickly realize that skill or lack thereof is irrelevant. You're here to look ridiculous, and that is enough. What's fascinating is how musical the punishment could get. Imagine dozens of people attempting to outshame each other with awkward instruments. Some small towns even kept multiple tubes ready so that a group concert could entertain an afternoon market. Children might mimic your attempts later, singing deliberately off-key songs about the lazy one who couldn't play. An odd little historical note: in some towns, the instrument was hollowed and slightly waterlogged to make producing sound even harder. You're puffing, squeaking, trying to keep control, but water or moisture in the tube makes it shriek unpredictably. The result? You are the source of comic relief, and the lesson is simple: don't shirk your duties, or you'll literally play the embarrassment. Standing there, cheeks red, lungs burning from blowing, you can't help but notice that the shame flute is as much about social theater as it is about punishment. It combines humiliation, performance, and absurdity. The town isn't just correcting you, they're laughing at you, teaching everyone else, and, oddly enough, fostering a strange sense of community through shared amusement. By the time you finally collapse in relief, the market is alive with chatter, laughter, and the distant squawk of the next unfortunate soul taking your place. You're soaked, tired, and humiliated, but in this bizarre little medieval corner, that's just another day. Section 8. You're finally left alone, soaked and exhausted from the shame flute ordeal, and you think perhaps the medieval punishments have paused. But then a guard gestures toward a low, wooden platform with strange straps and padding. At first, it looks harmless, like a simple bench. But as you approach, the guard motions for you to lie down. This is the infamous stocks for lying down, also called the couching board in some regions. Unlike the upright stocks or pillories, here your whole body is trapped. Your arms and legs are fastened, your back pressed against the board, and you're completely immobilized. You can barely shift a finger, and every time you breathe, you feel the pressure of the wood against your skin. The punishment was often reserved for minor theft, laziness, or disrupting market trades. Historians still debate whether the couching board was a widespread method or a localized curiosity, but what's certain is that lying there helpless for hours could be exhausting and humiliating. You're not in pain, but your muscles start to ache from total immobility, and boredom becomes almost unbearable. One quirky note: in some towns, officials would sprinkle sawdust or straw on the board to make it comfortable, though the effect was limited. Others would add weights to your legs, making it impossible to wiggle free. You quickly understand that the real punishment isn't the wood or the restraints, it's having nothing to do, nowhere to move, and being fully on display. From the outside, spectators might be entertained by your stiff, immobile form. They would tease, point, or even leave small gifts, an ironic carrot here, a coin there, to add flavor to your public display. Children often ran around, making faces or imitating your immobilized pose, learning lessons about order, obedience, and the consequences of small missteps. You lie there, staring at the sky, feeling the sun or rain depending on the day, while your mind wanders. Some scholars argue the couching board was more psychological than physical. After all, after hours of stillness, the urge to fidget, scratch, or simply stretch becomes overwhelming. It's a subtle form of discipline, proving that control over your body is as important as control over your behavior. Eventually, the hours pass, and you're released, stiff but intact. You notice the town square returning to its usual rhythm, merchants calling, children laughing, neighbors gossiping. Even though the punishment was minor, the experience lingers in your mind, a gentle but effective reminder of medieval social order. Section 9. You're finally able to walk again, though your muscles are stiff from the couching board. The town seems calm for a moment, until a curious wooden frame catches your eye. It's short, squat, and has a metal loop at the top. At first you think it's some kind of garden trellis. But no, this is the scold's bridle, a punishment designed with precision and irony. The bridle is strapped over your head, metal fitting tightly around your mouth and jaw. A small iron gag prevents speech, sometimes shaped to press your tongue down or restrict it from moving freely. You suddenly understand why it's called the scold's bridle. If you were known to nag, gossip, or talk too freely, now your voice is literally silenced. Historians are still debating how common the scold's bridle actually was. Some say it was widespread in parts of England and Scotland. Others argue it was more symbolic, appearing in court records but rarely in daily practice. Either way, it's effective. You can't argue, you can't complain, you can't even mumble. The world becomes frustratingly quiet and hilariously awkward. The bridle often included decorative elements, little iron masks, engraved symbols, or etchings that hinted at the wearer's crime. From the outside, it might look like an odd helmet or a small statue. Villagers point, laugh, and sometimes even give advice. Tilt your head, hold still, look embarrassed. Your inability to communicate amplifies the spectacle. A curious note, some bridal designs incorporated bells. Every move you make jingles, announcing your presence and adding an unintentional soundtrack to your punishment. Kids and neighbors alike would giggle at the new walking bell in town. The scholars debate whether the jingles were common or only a few unusual examples, but imagine having to shuffle down the main street with every step ringing like a tiny parade. And here's the deeper layer. Beyond humiliation, the bridle was a reminder of social expectations. Speech was regulated, behaviors were corrected, and gossiping had a tangible consequence. You can't help but notice how ingenious and absurd this is, silence enforced with iron and spectacle. So you shuffle along, metal on your head, bells jingling with every step, and realize the Middle Ages had a very peculiar sense of humor, mixing discipline, performance, and social theater in ways you never imagined. Section 10. You stagger away from the scold's bridle, still jingling with every step, and take a deep breath. You think you might finally have a moment of peace. But the town seems to have saved its strangest punishment for last. A small cart is waiting nearby, with a wooden seat mounted sideways, just big enough for one person. At first glance, it looks like an awkward chair, but it's called the gossip wheel. You're guided onto the seat, strapped in carefully, and the wheel begins to turn. Slowly at first, then faster, you're rotated to face the town square in every possible direction. Every turn reveals a new set of spectators, all pointing, laughing, and sometimes whispering advice about posture, expression, or proper remorse. You can't escape their eyes. You're a living, spinning monument to social correction. The gossip wheel was mainly used for minor offenses, spreading rumors, petty quarrels, or other small social missteps. Scholars still argue about its prevalence, with some suggesting it was a local curiosity in a few towns of Germany and the Low Countries, while others argue that it existed more widely but was underreported. Either way, it's effective, spinning slowly or rapidly, you can't hide, and humiliation becomes unavoidable. A bizarre detail: some towns attached a small bell to the wheel, so each rotation chimed like a tiny clock. Every turn reminded the audience anew of the inexorable march of consequence. Children might mimic the spinning in their games, while adults whispered lessons to neighbors: keep your tongue in check, or you might end up here too. Unlike previous punishments, the gossip wheel combines both motion and display. You're dizzy, disoriented, and hyper-aware of every passerby. Historians debate whether this motion-induced discomfort was intentional or just a clever side effect. Either way, it adds an entirely new layer to public humiliation. By the time the wheel stops and you're released, your head is spinning, your limbs tingling, and your pride battered. The crowd disperses, chatting about the spectacle, some still chuckling. You stagger off, realizing the medieval sense of humor had a talent for turning minor social transgressions into full-blown public theater. And as you step away, a thought lingers: perhaps the real punishment wasn't physical discomfort, but being observed, noted, and remembered by an entire community. Section 11. You're dizzy from the gossip wheel and your pride still bruised, yet the town isn't quite done with you. A wooden frame with hanging ropes catches your eye, and the guard motions you forward. You think, maybe this time it's just a simple restraint. But it's the shame chain, a curious device designed to both bind and display. You're fastened into the chain, wrists and ankles connected by iron links, and led slowly through the town. You can't walk freely, every step is dictated by the chain. People point, whisper, and sometimes laugh, imagining what you must be thinking. The humiliation comes not from pain but from being forced to parade your minor misdeeds before the entire community. Shame chains were often used for small thieves, unruly children, or townspeople who broke local rules. Scholars debate their frequency. Some suggest they were rare, others that they were a staple in northern European villages. Either way, you feel every eye watching, every giggle echoing, as the chain drags you along. An amusing note: some towns added bells to the chain, so every movement jingled in rhythm. The unintended soundtrack accompanies your slow, halting steps, turning you into a walking, jingling monument to embarrassment. Children mimic your movements, turning the scene into an impromptu game for the next generation. Interestingly, some chains were long enough to loop around a market stall or a public tree, creating temporary obstacles for yourself while everyone watched. You trip over your own feet, struggle to keep balance, and feel the weight of both iron and eyes on you. Historians are still debating whether the display was intended more as a deterrent or simply as public amusement. By the time you're released, your muscles ache from awkward angles, your face is red from embarrassment, and the crowd has moved on to the next spectacle. You realize that the shame chain isn't about teaching moral lessons, it's a carefully orchestrated mix of performance, discipline, and social pressure, leaving you with stories to tell for the rest of your days. You shuffle off, jingling faintly with every step, carrying a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and mild incredulity at the lengths people went to keep order. Section 12. You finally have a moment to catch your breath, though the jingling from the shame chain still lingers in your memory. You wander a few steps before being led to a curious stone structure at the edge of the town square. At first, it looks like a low bench, perhaps for resting. But as you approach, you notice the small holes and narrow slots carved into it. This is the cheese press, an odd medieval device for public correction. Unlike what the name suggests, you're not turning dairy into curds. Instead, the cheese press is designed to immobilize and mildly compress your body, leaving you awkwardly pressed but unharmed. You lie down, arms and legs constrained, and the top stone is lowered just enough to make you uncomfortable, like a gentle but insistent reminder that your actions have consequences. The cheese press was used for minor infractions, arguing with neighbors, skipping chores, or teasing local officials. Scholars still debate how widespread it actually was. Some records suggest it appeared in small towns in France and the Low Countries, while other evidence hints it may have been more symbolic, rarely used outside official documentation. A quirky detail, some towns carved faces or decorative patterns on the press itself. As you're pressed down, you notice faintly smiling faces staring up at you, as if the device itself is silently judging. The combination of discomfort and visual absurdity makes it both humiliating and strangely comical. Interestingly, the cheese press was sometimes used in conjunction with other public punishments. Villagers might pass by, pointing, whispering, or even offering small objects to toss over the stone, soft fruits, straw, or scraps, adding a playful yet public dimension to the ordeal. Historians argue whether the real goal was deterrence or simple amusement, but either way, you're the main character in a medieval comedy. As you lie there, pressed uncomfortably but intact, you can't help but reflect on the ingenuity of these punishments. They didn't need to harm you physically to leave a lasting impression. The combination of public scrutiny, mild discomfort, and absurdity created an experience you wouldn't soon forget. When the press is finally lifted, you rise slowly, stiff but unharmed, and continue your journey through the medieval town. You realize that even the smallest infractions could lead to elaborate, imaginative, and oddly humorous public displays. Section 13. You stagger away from the cheese press, rubbing sore spots and wondering if the town has any mercy left. Just as you think you might finally rest, a guard leads you to a small platform surrounded by curious onlookers. It's a modest wooden structure with a few ropes dangling above, and at first glance, it looks like some kind of exercise equipment. But it's actually the mock gallows, a playful yet humiliating punishment. You're asked to stand on the platform while the guard hooks a light rope around your waist. No harm comes to your body, but you're lifted slightly off the ground, dangling just enough to wobble and sway. From the crowd's perspective, you're performing an exaggerated simulation of a more serious fate, and it's strangely entertaining to watch. The mock gallows was often used for minor misdeeds, teasing neighbors, gossip, or small disputes over trade. Historians still debate how frequently it was used, with some arguing it was a rare novelty and others suggesting it might have been more common in festive markets. Either way, the visual humor is undeniable. A curious detail, sometimes the mock gallows included small bells or wooden clappers attached to the platform. Every sway caused jingles and claps, creating a ridiculous soundtrack to your temporary suspension. Children mimicked the movements, adding to the spectacle, while adults whispered advice or commentary. Interestingly, some records suggest that performers, sometimes even local actors, were occasionally hired to demonstrate the mock gallows in town fairs. In these cases, the punishment was part performance, part public lesson. You quickly realize that the line between humiliation and theater was delightfully blurred. As you sway gently, you notice the crowd's attention shifting back and forth between laughter, whispers, and even applause. You wobble, arms tense, cheeks red, and for a moment feel like a living puppet on strings. Scholars still debate whether the mock gallows were meant as deterrence, entertainment, or social correction, but the effect is the same: unforgettable, mildly embarrassing, and oddly theatrical. Finally, the rope is released, and you step down, legs shaky but intact. You can feel the relief flooding in as your body reconnects with the ground, and a soft smile creeps across your face. Even minor infractions, it seems, were never simple in a medieval town. Section 14. You're relieved to be back on solid ground, and your muscles begin to relax, just enough to wonder what else this quirky medieval town has in store. A guard gestures toward a long table with small, curious objects scattered across it. At first, it looks like a craftsman's workstation, but it's actually the mock courtroom, a punishment disguised as a playful legal lesson. You're guided to sit in a tiny chair at one end of the table, facing a small wooden gavel and miniature court documents. Officials pretend to hold a trial, calling out your minor offenses, gossiping, teasing neighbors, or skipping duties. The twist? The proceedings are exaggerated, almost comical, with exaggerated hand gestures and theatrical declarations. You become a living exhibit, learning your lesson in front of the entire town. Historians still debate the prevalence of these mock trials. Some argue they were mostly reserved for festivals or ceremonial days, while others suggest they were occasionally used for routine minor offenses. Either way, the effect is unmistakable: humiliation, entertainment, and a vivid reminder of social norms. A quirky detail: townspeople sometimes added props, such as small evidence items, to make the trial appear serious yet ridiculous. Children would mimic the judge and jury at play, turning the serious-sounding punishment into a community game. Scholars still debate whether this theatrical approach was truly effective in changing behavior, or just amusing for spectators, but it certainly left a memorable impression. Another curious aspect: mock trials were often accompanied by light-hearted commentary, where neighbors whispered jokes about your testimony or exaggerated facial expressions. You realize that the medieval sense of humor loved mixing instruction with performance. As you sit through the proceedings, trying not to look embarrassed, you notice that the mock courtroom cleverly teaches social lessons without inflicting real harm. Your minor misdeeds are highlighted, your pride slightly dented, but you leave unharmed and perhaps a little wiser. The entire town witnesses the blend of humor, judgment, and social correction, a delicate balance of discipline and amusement. By the time the trial ends, you rise from your tiny chair, feeling a mixture of relief, fatigue, and quiet amusement. You continue wandering through the town, reflecting on the ingenuity of these unusual medieval punishments. Section 15. You finally feel like you've seen it all: the shame flute, the couching board, the scold's bridle, gossip wheels, chains, cheese presses, mock gallows, and even the mock courtroom. Your legs are stiff, your cheeks are sore from blushing, and yet you can't help but admire the creativity of it all. But the town has saved a final, gentle punishment: the story bench. You're guided to a quiet corner, where a long wooden bench faces the town square. Unlike the other punishments, this one isn't about restraint or embarrassment. Instead, you sit and listen as an elder recounts tales of minor misdeeds, strange occurrences, and quirky historical anecdotes. The point isn't to punish, it's to teach through narrative, humor, and reflection. Historians note that storytelling benches were common in smaller towns as a way to combine education, social cohesion, and mild discipline. Scholars debate whether they were genuinely effective in teaching moral lessons, but no one disputes that people remembered the stories. You realize that after hours of absurd, creative punishments, this gentle storytelling is a relief, both physically and mentally. A charming detail, some benches were accompanied by small wooden toys, carved figures, or musical instruments. Listeners could fidget, tap, or hum along, making the experience interactive and soothing. Children often gathered here first, learning history, humor, and social rules before even reaching adulthood. As you sit and watch the sun dip behind the rooftops, the stories flow gently. Minor transgressions are recounted with exaggerated flair, yet each tale contains a small lesson about behavior, community, and human nature. You notice how much effort went into making learning entertaining, turning shame into subtle guidance. Finally, as the elder finishes the last tale, you stretch, feeling lighter than you have in hours. The town is calm now, people going about their business. You've survived the medieval public theater, and in the process, you've been taught, entertained, and slightly humbled. A smile crosses your face, you realize that humor, creativity, and gentle instruction were the ultimate medieval tools of correction. Now, you sit on the bench, taking a deep breath, feeling as if everything around you has slowed down. The wind gently brushes your face, the sunlight softly spills across the town square, and the entire village seems to be breathing quietly. You recall the quirky punishments you just experienced, the clumsy shame flute, the stiff couching board, the jingling shame chain, each one making you smile faintly and quickening your heartbeat ever so slightly. Your body gradually relaxes, your legs no longer stiff, and your breathing becomes steady and calm. You realize that these absurd experiences haven't truly harmed you, instead, they have left traces of memory somewhere between humor and gentleness. The town has taught you that life, social norms, and even the smallest mistakes can be understood with creativity and a sense of humor. Closing your eyes, you feel as if you've already entered a dream. The surrounding sounds are soft, as if the wind, the creaking of wood, and distant laughter have blended into a gentle harmony. You whisper good night in your heart, feeling the day's fatigue slowly dissipate. The medieval oddities, humor, and stories accompany you into sleep, and you, too, rest peacefully within this gentle embrace.